This is a video on section 11.1 square roots. As we begin, I am going to go over the vocabulary at the top of 577. And the first term that you see there is square root. It is defined as a number when multiplied by itself equals n. Okay, that probably makes no sense. So here's what it means. Let me back up a little bit. If I tell you to solve 4 squared, then you would know that's repeated multiplication. It means you're multiplying it to itself. You're saying 4 times 4, and that's 16. The reverse of this is what a square root is. So I could ask you, using what's called a radical sign, what is the square root of 16? That's what this says. The square root of 16 is equals, okay? That's an arrow. And then you would ask yourself, well, what number times itself will give me 16? And the answer would be 4. So the square root of 16 is 4. I could ask you, what is the square root of 25? And you would say 5. What is the square root of 9? 3. What is the square root of 100? 10. Okay? All of these are called perfect squares because when you multiply a number to itself, you get these perfect squares and under the radical sign. The square root of 10 is not easily found, right? No whole number times itself will give you 10. I can't do 3 is 9 and 4 is 16. So the square root of 10, the square root of 11, the square root of 12, those are not perfect squares. But when you square a number, the resulting product is a perfect square, okay? And then you see perfect squares down below the definition for square root. All right, so let's do some work with just these perfect squares, okay? We talked about what a radical sign is. That is there in the middle of 577. So let's look at example 2, letter A. And it says evaluating, and you might remember evaluate means to solve. And A says the square root of 36. So the answer is 6 because 6 squared is 36. Now I want to point out something in here that's dealt with above example 2 in radical signs. There is a sentence that says, for example, the square root of 4 is 2. That's the positive square root of 4. And then if you see a negative sign outside of a radical sign, then the answer will contain that negative sign. So, let me see if I can explain this. This part right here, evaluating this, requires you to remember the order of operations. Okay? P being parentheses, E being exponents, okay? And an exponent might be a 2, a square, okay? It also includes square roots, okay? So, looking back at this not equation, well, I guess you could call it an equation, this expression, you are going to deal with this part of it, this exponent part, the square root, before you attach that negative sign, okay? Now, we did this a little bit before with square numbers, so you might have seen a problem that said a negative sign, and then it could have been like this, okay? So you would have to square the number and then apply the negative sign. The same thing is happening in this negative square root of 4. First, I find the square root of 4. That's 2. Then I apply the negative sign. Okay? All right. One other thing I kind of need to explain to you, and you will see this in example 1. Let me clear some of this off. You know that 6 squared equals 36. If I square negative 6, if I say negative 6 times negative 6, you should remember that negative times negative is a positive, right? So negative 6 times negative 6 is also 36. So sometimes in this lesson, you will see this. Let me give you a different number. I'll do 81, okay? The square root of 81 is positive or negative 9. So you might see it written like that, okay? And if you look down at guided practice on page 577, you will see that it says find the 2 square roots of the number. And then number 1 just has a 9, okay? There is no radical sign around it because in the directions it says you're finding the 2 square roots. So you would know, based on what I just showed you right here, that the answer, if it's asking for 2, you would say 3 and negative 3. That's how it will be written in the back of the book. You are welcome to write it like this, okay? Now, in teaching this in the past, it gets confusing as to when you're supposed to answer positive and negative and when you can just put a 3, okay? So, my suggestion to you is you only need to answer positive and negative when it asks for the 2 square roots, okay? Or the other time you will see it, if you flip over to example 5 on page 579, it says to solve the following equation, okay? And you have this. What number, when squared, would be 25? And in that case, it could be 5 or negative 5. So, because it's confusing of when they want you to say plus or minus, I'm not going to count off on a quiz or a test unless the question says find the 2 square roots, okay? If you're not sure, you can always put plus or minus, okay? But, well, I'll just leave that at that. Hopefully it will come up again and we can talk about it more. If that's confusing to you and you want to send me an email asking a question, I'll be more than happy to answer it. I will say, I can't, if you will look, sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. At the bottom of 579, number 15 says to evaluate the square root, and 15 looks like this, square root of 81, okay? The answer in my book is only a 9. What I'm trying to say to you is the pattern of the textbook seems to be if the radical sign is present, you don't have to answer plus or minus. So the only time I'm going to require it, like on a test or a quiz, is if I ask you to find 2 square roots, okay? Then I expect 2 answers. Otherwise, it's fine with me if you just answer positively. Okay, in this next part, I'm going to give you the answers to 1 through 8 at the bottom of 577 in the guided practice. So before you keep going in this video, I would pause it, answer 1 through 8 on a scratch piece of paper, then come back and I will tell you the answers. In numbers 1 through 4, it does ask for 2 square roots, so you need to give both, positive and negative, okay? Sorry about my handwriting. I'm trying to not let the rest of my hand touch the board because it messes up things. All right, number 1. The 2 square roots of 9 are positive and negative 3. Number 2, you should get positive and negative 8 for 64. Number 3, you should get positive and negative 10. And number 4, you should get positive and negative 13. Let me speak to this one for just a second. You cannot use a calculator in this chapter, okay? Most of you probably do not know 13 squared, okay? My suggestion to you is you have a little cheat sheet to the side while you're working on this math, and you do the perfect squares from 2, if you need to, all the way up to 25. As far as I know, they don't give you any higher than that, okay? So that way you're not having to guess, and it's going to get a little harder before we leave square roots behind, okay? And I don't want you to sit there and struggle over what times itself is 169 or 196 or 225. So I would just have a little index card, do the perfect squares up to 25, and then you have it there to the side because you're going to need that off and on, okay? Now, moving on to 5 through 8. Number 5, notice that there is a radical sign in these 4, so they're only looking for the one answer. The square root of 25 is 5. The negative square root of 1, and we haven't talked much about 1, but 1 times 1 is 1, okay? So the square root of 1 is 1, and then you just put the negative sign there, okay? The negative square root of 144. Again, if you've got your little cheat sheet going, you would have 12 times 12 on here. The square root of 144 is 12, and then add the negative sign. And you would also have 11 times 11, and that's 121. Okay, that's how you do the guided practice. All right, turning the page to 578, let's look at example 3 together. The equation S equals 8 times, because it's right next to this radical sign, the square root of h expresses the minimum speed, which is showed by S. S is for speed, in feet per second, needed by a pole vaulter to clear a height of h feet. Okay? How fast, so it's asking about speed, should a pole vaulter run to vault over a height of 16 feet? So how can we solve this? We plug in what we know. We're looking for speed. We do not know that, but we know that we need this formula. 8 times the square root of h, and they told us that the height is 16 feet. Don't forget order of operations. I'm going to solve the square root before I multiply, okay? What is the square root of 16? It is 4. So I'm doing 8 times 4, and I would get 32. So the pole vaulter needs a minimum of 32 feet per second. That's how fast they have to run. That 32 doesn't sound like speed, but we did solve for S. Okay? All right. I believe that I don't have enough time to go into anything else. I'm going to stop this video. There will be a part 2, and I will pick up with example 4 on page 578.